I once met an American who genuinely believed Britain didn't have tanks at the start of World War II, which is hilarious considering we literally invented them. He also thought D-Day was purely an American mission, that the US saved Europe twice, and that without America we'd all be speaking German today. Pause. How does an entire country convince itself it single-handedly won a war it joined halfway through? Americans don't just think they won wars. They think they pioneered the entire concept of winning them. Like some Steve Jobs of global conflict who shows up late, gives a shiny presentation, and somehow persuades everyone that they invented the whole thing. I'm British. My grandfather fought in North Africa in 1941. He was dodging German bullets in the desert long before most Americans could find Libya on a map. Many still can't, to be honest. He came home with sand in his boots and shrapnel in his leg, and not once did he claim he did it alone. He knew better. He fought beside Australians, Indians, New Zealanders, Poles. He understood it took nearly the whole world to stop the Nazis. But somewhere between his generation and mine, the story shifted. I first noticed it at university. There was an American exchange student. Smart guy, even studying history. We were in a pub in Manchester, and somehow World War II came up, the way it always does when Europeans and Americans drink together. He dropped it casually, like he was commenting on the weather. Yeah, we basically saved Europe. Twice. Just like that. We saved Europe. I nearly spat out my beer. My friend Sophie, who's French, set her glass down very slowly. You could see her grandfather's stories replaying behind her eyes. The occupation, the resistance, the years of fighting before America even entered the war. But the American guy didn't notice. He just kept talking, confidently, as if he'd stated a universal truth. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just his personal opinion. This was what he'd been taught. Across American classrooms, kids grow up with a version of World War II, where their country is the hero who swoops in and saves the day. Never mind that Britain fought alone for a year. Never mind that the Soviet Union lost 27 million people. Never mind Polish mathematicians breaking Enigma, French resistance fighters blowing up supply lines, or Canadian troops storming Juno Beach. In the American retelling, those parts are background noise. Side quests. The main plot? America arrives. America wins. Roll credits. This is what happens when a nation decides that 4 years of involvement equals ownership of a 6-year war. When showing up in Act 3 makes you the protagonist of the whole film. I've spent the last 5 years collecting these moments. Hostile conversations, museum debates, family dinner arguments. Every time, it's the same pattern. Americans have been taught that World War II is their story. That Europe was powerless without them. That victory was impossible until they arrived. And when you add actual context, mentioning the millions of Soviet soldiers or the fact Britain held the line alone, they look at you like you're making it all up. Like you're trying to steal credit from the real heroes. The weirdest part? They're not trying to be rude. They truly believe it. It isn't arrogance, it's enormous, system-wide ignorance, fed by schools, reinforced by Hollywood, and repeated until it became fact. And wait until you hear the part where someone told me D-Day was an American-only operation. Or how they explain the Soviet Union capturing Berlin. Or their faces when they learned Britain was still paying off US war loans in 2006, 61 years after the war ended. We were writing checks to Washington while British soldiers fought alongside Americans in Iraq. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with Brad. Brad had a Captain America backpack and Brad was about to discover his entire understanding of history was upside down. Prague, 2019. A hostel near Old Town Square, the kind of place where backpackers from 30 countries cram into bunk beds and argue about everything. Mostly history students on a semester abroad, trying to see Europe before real life starts. I'm in the common room with people from France, Poland, Germany, Australia, and Brad. Brad is from Ohio. Brad has a Captain America backpack. I'm not exaggerating. We're talking about World War II because someone mentioned visiting Auschwitz. Brad leans back in his chair, relaxed, and drops it. Yeah, we basically saved Europe twice. He says it like he's stating the color of the sky. Marie, the French girl, stops mid-sip. She's from Normandy. Her great-grandfather died in the resistance. She gently sets down her cup and asks, "What about 1939 to 1941? Her voice is calm but sharp. Brad shrugs. Preparation time. You weren't even in the war, she says. Strategic patience, Brad replies, smiling like this is playful debate. Marie's face goes red. She stares at her cup like she's considering whether to drink it or throw it across the room. Finally she says, Stratégique patience, oui? While my great-grandfather was shot by Nazis in Normandy, America was très patient. Brad grins. See? She gets it. She does not get it. She is moments away from committing homicide. I catch her eye and shake my head. Not worth it. We've all been through this before. Strategic patience. That's what we're calling neutrality now. That's what we're calling selling weapons to both sides while Europe burned. The next night, different conversation. Brad has just learned that Britain fought alone from June 1940 to June 1941. A full year of facing the entire Nazi war machine with only the Commonwealth behind us. He looks honestly baffled. Wait, you guys didn't have America? He asks. Correct, I say. But you didn't even have tanks at the start. I inhale slowly. We had tanks. We invented tanks. 1916. A little place called the Somme. Maybe you've heard of it. Not good ones, though, Brad replies, completely sure of himself. Right, that must be why Hitler cancelled the invasion of Britain, too frightened of our bad tanks. Brad pauses. He's so sure of himself. Like he's repeating a fact he memorized in school. Right, that's definitely why Hitler cancelled the invasion of Britain. Terrified of our terrible tanks. Brad stops, confused. He cancelled an invasion, he asks. Operation Sea Lion, I tell him. Summer 1940. Scrapped because the Royal Navy and RAF made it impossible. Brad takes out his phone and Googles it. Then his expression changes in a very funny way. Huh. They really didn't tell us that part. Shocking, I say. Jacob, the German guy, snorts into his beer. Anna from Poland quietly slips out of the room. And that's when it hits me. This isn't actually about Brad. Brad's a good guy. He shares snacks. He asks thoughtful questions about our countries. He's not rude, he's not dim, he's simply been taught the wrong story. Somewhere in Ohio, in a classroom with flickering fluorescent lights and plastic chairs, a teacher opened a textbook and told him that America won World War II. Not helped win. Not played a major role. Won. Period. End of chapter. And Brad believed it, because why wouldn't he? Teachers don't lie. Textbooks don't lie. Whole school systems don't just invent things, right? Except somehow, they did. Somehow a whole nation convinced itself that 4 years equals 6. That joining in December 1941 means you were there from day one. That D-Day replaces Dunkirk. That Iwo Jima overwrites Stalingrad. That American sacrifice eclipses everyone else's. I'm starting to understand. This isn't really a fight about dates or numbers. Facts are easy to verify. This is about narrative. It's about the story America tells itself about who it is. The hero. The rescuer. The country that arrives in the final act and saves the helpless. Never mind that the theater had been burning for 3 years before they even bought a ticket. But maybe I'm being harsh. Maybe it's just Brad and a few confused teachers. Maybe most Americans know the broader story. I'm about to discover that's not true at all. It's absolutely not just Brad. 2 years later, I'm in Boston. An actual museum. Marble floors, quiet halls, expensive security guards. I'm walking through the World War II exhibit with my American girlfriend, studying photos of soldiers, tanks, and bombed-out cities. We stop at a huge display about the end of the war in Europe. The sign is massive, no way to miss it. It reads, American forces liberated Europe. Not Allied forces. Not the combined armies of more than 30 nations. Just American forces. My girlfriend notices my face shift. What? She asks. Do you know who took Berlin? I say. Us? She replies, uncertain but hopeful. The Soviets, I say. She freezes. Wait, seriously? Seriously. The Red Army fought their way street by street through Berlin in April 1945. They lost around 300,000 soldiers doing it, more people than live in my entire hometown. They raised their flag over the Reichstag, while American forces were still about 100 miles away. So why didn't we learn that, she asks. Because if American students learned the Soviets actually captured Berlin, some kid in Ohio might start Googling who really carried the war in Europe, and discover the US showed up in Act 3 with snacks. She blinks. We brought snacks? Lend-Lease. Spam and trucks. Important snacks, honestly. The Soviets were eating American spam while fighting their way to Berlin. But that doesn't fit the cinematic version, where the US swoops in and saves the helpless continent. A few months later, I'm at Thanksgiving. First time meeting the extended family. I'm the British boyfriend novelty item. Everyone wants to ask about T, the Queen, and whether I know their cousin who lives in London. Sure, mate. London has 9 million people, but maybe I've bumped into Steve. Uncle Jim is 3 beers deep when he says it. If it weren't for us, you'd all be speaking German right now. He points his beer at me like he's just played a winning chess move. Actually, Britain was never invaded, I say, keeping it friendly. Yeah, because we saved you, Uncle Jim replies. December 41. Pearl Harbor, I remind him gently. And then we saved you, he repeats. Battle of Britain was summer 1940, I say. We'd already beaten the Luftwaffe before you even joined. Lend-Lease, Uncle Jim says triumphantly, his trump card, which we paid back. With interest. Until 2006. The table goes dead silent. Someone drops a fork. My girlfriend's dad suddenly becomes deeply fascinated by the ceiling. Her mum begins urgently offering sweet potatoes to people who are already drowning in sweet potatoes. 2006, her aunt whispers. 61 years of payments, I say, paid off while British soldiers were fighting in Iraq alongside American soldiers. I pause. That part was free. My girlfriend, bless her, asks, does anyone want more stuffing? Very wise woman. She's probably seen this debate a dozen times. But here's the thing, 2006. Britain was still writing checks to Washington for World War II supplies, while British soldiers were dying in Iraq and Afghanistan next to American troops. 61 years of repayment. 6 decades. And most Americans have never heard a word of it. Back in Prague, Brad finds a D-Day documentary. He practically sprints into the common room, Captain America backpack bouncing behind him. See, he says, pointing at the screen. American operation. We led the invasion. Tomasz, the Polish guy, doesn't even look up from his book. He's been on the same page for 2 days. He's heard this conversation too many times. British and Canadian beaches, Tomasz mutters. British Naval Command. British intelligence. British deception plan that convinced the Germans to defend Calais instead. He flips the page. Very impressive British tea drinking. Yeah, but Eisenhower, Brad insists. Montgomery planned the operation, I say. Eisenhower was the supreme commander because Roosevelt pushed for it. Why would he do that? Brad asks. Tomasz finally looks up. Politics. Churchill wanted Alexander, a British general. Roosevelt said no. So Eisenhower got the job. He goes back to his book. Not that complicated, he mutters. Brad pulls out his phone and starts searching. His expression shifts slowly, that look people get when they realize their entire high school history curriculum just fell apart in front of them. All the facts he memorized for the AP exam. All the confident explanations from teachers. Turns out half the story was missing. simplified until the truth had basically vanished. There were 5 beaches, Brad says finally, reading from his screen. Only 2 were American. Gold, Juno, Sword, I say. British and Canadian. Omaha and Utah, Tomas adds without looking up. American. Good beaches. But not all the beaches. Brad sets his phone down and just stares at his Captain America backpack like it personally betrayed him. A few days later, I'm in a bar in Austin, Texas. A guy hears my accent and instantly guesses I'm British. Here we go again. So World War II, right? You lot needed us, he says, friendly tone, no malice. Just repeating what he thinks is obvious. India sent 2.5 million soldiers, I reply. Australia, Canada, New Zealand, fighting long before the US joined. Yeah, but the Pacific, he says. That was our war. British forces fought in Burma, Malaya, Singapore. 87,000 Commonwealth troops died fighting Japan. Doesn't count, he says. I put down my drink. 87,000 people doesn't count? He squirms. I mean, it counts, but the Pacific was mostly us, right? The Japanese invaded British colonies. Fought British, Australian, and Indian soldiers for years. But sure, mainly you. He goes quiet. Then mumbles, they should make movies about that. They do. You just don't watch them. He looks down at his beer, peeling the label. I've technically won the argument, but it doesn't feel like a victory. These conversations keep stacking up, city after city, different Americans, same storyline. But nothing prepared me for Washington. Washington, D.C., 2023. The National World War II Memorial sits between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument. It's genuinely beautiful. A huge circular plaza, fountains catching the light, 2 granite arches, 56 pillars for every state and territory. Visitors take photos. Veterans in wheelchairs sit quietly, remembering friends who never made it home. I walk around the whole place twice, reading each pillar, scanning every inscription, searching. Eventually, I ask a security guard, "Where's the Soviet pillar?" He stares at me like I just asked for the unicorn bathroom. This is an American memorial, he says. Right. But the Soviets were allies. They fought with you. There's some acknowledgement inside. Inside, I find a tiny information center. One small plaque, maybe 2 feet wide, smaller than the sign for the gift shop, mentions the Soviet Union in a single sentence. One sentence. For the country that lost 27 million people. For the nation that destroyed 3/4 of the German army. For the force that captured Berlin while American troops were still crossing the Rhine. An elderly man stands there reading the same plaque. White hair, lined face, a hat covered in old military pins. He notices me looking and smiles faintly. You know what's wild, he says. What's that? I fought alongside Soviet troops at the Elbe River, April 45. That's where American and Soviet forces met in central Germany. He takes a breath. We hugged, smoked together, took photos. Some of those guys had marched from Stalingrad, 4 years of non-stop fighting. He looks back at the tiny plaque. They lost 400 men for every 1 American. And most people who come here don't even realize they were our allies. The number hangs in the air. 400 to 1. I do the maths. America lost about 400,000 soldiers in the entire war. The Soviets lost that many in single battles. At Stalingrad alone, more Soviet soldiers died than all American and British troops combined in the entire war. The old veteran shakes his head and slowly walks away, leaning on his cane. That moment hits differently. What I learned after 5 years across 10 countries. It's not that Americans don't care about history. They do. It's that they've been taught a streamlined version where the complicated parts get sanded off. Where 85 million dead becomes a simple movie plot. Where we saved the world is easier to digest than we were part of a huge, brutal global struggle that involved dozens of nations. American bravery, American industry, American sacrifice, absolutely real. Vital, even. But not the entire picture. British intelligence cracked codes. Soviet armies shattered the Wehrmacht. American factories produced staggering amounts of equipment. Canadian forces stormed the beaches, Polish pilots defended the skies. French resistance fighters sabotaged supply lines. It took everyone. But simple stories spread better than complex ones. And America has always been excellent at storytelling. Remember Brad and the Captain America backpack? I ran into him 2 years later in Berlin completely by chance. I was at a cafe near the Brandenburg Gate when someone tapped my shoulder. It was Brad. He looked different, quieter, more thoughtful. He'd studied abroad. Actually visited the places. Normandy. Warsaw. Auschwitz. Stood in front of the Stalingrad memorials. Walked among the mass graves. Still had the Captain America backpack though. Some things never change. We grabbed coffee and sat outside, the Brandenburg Gate in view. Man, I was so clueless, he said, stirring his drink. Like, embarrassingly clueless. We all start ignorant about something, I said. I'm gonna teach history now, he said. High school. Back in Ohio. Starting next autumn. He grinned. Time to blow some minds? I lifted my cup. Good luck. You're gonna need it. Why? I ask. The textbook companies haven't changed. You're going to be fighting the same battle I have. Brad thinks about that for a moment, takes a slow sip of his coffee, and then, perfect timing, says, strategic patience? I almost choke laughing. He's learned. He's actually learned. And that's the real point. The issue isn't Brad. It's not Uncle Jim, or the guy in Austin, or my girlfriend's relatives. The problem is the curriculum. The textbooks. The neat, oversimplified version of history America feeds itself because the messy truths don't fit inside multiple-choice exams. Americans didn't win World War II on their own, but they definitely won the marketing department. And honestly, good for them. I just wish they'd invite the rest of us to the victory celebration. If you enjoyed watching me calmly correct Americans for 11 minutes, hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories, especially about how they teach the Revolutionary War, and trust me, the French have opinions. Drop a comment. What's the biggest historical myth you were taught growing up? Let's compare notes. Because the more we learn, the less we fight, or at least we fight about things that actually matter. I glance at Brad across the table, sitting outside the cafe with that same ridiculous backpack, finally understanding what his teachers never explained. Cheers.